What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I'm Daniel Oyefusi.
I'm
That
David Neal,
is David Neal.
as
Thanks
he
so
was
much.
about to tell you.
As I was about to tell you. Thanks so much for tuning in. Quick reminder before we start, make sure to subscribe to the Miami Herald YouTube page, like, share, comment, as well as subscribe to the Miami Herald. Uh, Now we are just days away from real Dolphins football, if you want to call it that. The start of the preseason for the Dolphins starts
Oh,
on Friday night at Hard Rock Stadium, where they will host the Atlanta Falcons for their preseason opener. Before that, they're being very gracious guests to the Dirty Birds as they are hosting them for a pair of joint practices in Miami Gardens at the Baptist Health Training Complex. Day one of two joint practices concluded today, Tuesday, with kind of an even affair. The offense having a little bit of growing pains as we've seen this time against the Falcons defense that looks to be a little bit improved, and the Dolphins defense kind of picking up where they left off in the first 2 weeks of training camp against Miami's offense, showing some good stuff on film against the Falcons offense. But we got a lot more to get into before joint practices were held. The Dolphins released their first depth chart of the season. I'm not going to say who said it, but someone said they're not worth the paper that they're made on, they're printed on. I'm not going to say names, but maybe some interesting things to kind of glean from that, as well as looking back at some comments from one of the Dolphins coordinators and kind of reacting to that and whether that's something that Dolphins fans should be kind of worried about. But we're going to start with that depth chart.
the
Again,
depth chart.
the depth charts. McDaniel said depth charts are his nemesis because again, he said they're rotating guys, and a lot of guys are getting different reps with different teams, first team, second team, third teams. However, I think maybe the most significant thing for us is that the Dolphins officially acknowledged some stuff that we technically weren't allowed to acknowledge. Obviously, there's various rules, reporting rules when we're at training camp. You can't say where certain guys are lining up. You can't say who's with the first team or second team. However, if you look at this depth chart, you will see first team left guard. Not really surprised. Liam Eichenberg, the team's second round pick from a couple years back. But you look to the right, second team left guard is Isaiah Wynn, who the team signed from the New England Patriots in the offseason. Doesn't really have much experience at guard. I think he played a couple of snaps maybe last year. Just a few snaps in New England. He's mainly been a tackle. However, with Austin Jackson at right tackle, Teron Armstead at left tackle, a lot of people were kind of speculating maybe he can move inside, play left guard. I mean, the Dolphins officially, he talked about it after Saturday scrimmage, but the Dolphins officially acknowledged that. And I got to say, I mean, it has been kind of a struggle for Eichenberg during the first 2 weeks of training camp. I think a lot of focus was on him and Austin Jackson and kind of the progress that they can make with Butch Berry, the new offensive line coach. And, year 4, this is for Jackson, now year 3 for Eichenberg. But I'd say definitely Jackson seems to be a lot more ahead in his progress compared to Eichenberg, who again kind of had some struggles through the first 2 weeks of training camp. We saw that again with the joint practices. And it seems to be an open competition. Coaches will tell you there's competition at every spot, but we know that's not true. We know who the starting
Yeah, no,
quarterback is.
no, no,
We know who the wide receivers are. Is anybody
no,
competing with Teron Armstead for the left tackle spot? No.
no,
But left
no.
guard seems to be the spot that there is real competition, and that's something I'm keeping my eye out for. Another thing that we again weren't really allowed to announce, but the Dolphins have now acknowledged it is Trill Williams at safety. He spent his first couple years in Miami at cornerback. We all know he has had 2 ACL injuries, but now he's like seemingly going back to safety, which he played at Syracuse. They've got him down there, third team safety, and he's kind of working his way back. Tuesday was the first practice that he wore the red non-contact jersey, so he's seemingly a full go, or he's able to kind of participate in all forms of practice without any limitations. So that's kind of a new unique wrinkle. We're going to talk about it in the second half, but Vic Fangio said the Dolphins really don't have a starter opposite Javon Holland, so maybe he factors into that. Anything stick out to you about this initial depth chart?
Um, Not really. I mean, not, not really. Uh, everything was pretty much as expected. A lot of things were as expected.
Yeah,
They still,
I'll say
they're
with the
still putting
starting group, really
they're
nothing.
still putting Ramsey in at the
Yeah, which is
as the
why
starting
when you
corner.
go to that point, you're kind of like, yeah, all right, well, it's like, what
Yeah,
is it
yeah,
really?
yeah. Okay. You don't want to, you don't want to, you know, you don't want to piss Ramsey off right out of the box saying, okay, you're a few days from being injured, so now you're down the depth chart. I don't know. Is that I don't know if that's a
I mean,
that's a little
he's
love him up
technically
thing,
still on the active roster, so maybe obviously once they get to the regular season and you put on IR, then you
So
change it. But yeah,
yeah, but you could put him down. Come on,
I mean, you're not gonna put him as like fifth. I mean, you're not gonna put him as fifth string behind all the the
no,
undrafted free
all the
agents.
all the all the all the guys are going to be gone in 2 3 weeks
I
after.
mean, if they put Ramsey at 16 corner, I think somebody would be like, "What the heck's going on?" So I don't know. I
Um,
guess it's housekeeping.
so yeah, that's one of the things. That was pretty much it. Look a little curiosity. Okay, they've got uh Barrows as expected listed as their top kick returner, and punt returner, which it's a he he did that well with the Jets. And yeah, it's exactly pretty well. I mean, pretty much. I find it interesting they listed they went with only two wide receivers and a fullback.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, they use Ingold like Ingold plays like 300 snaps. I mean, he might as well be a legitimate starter. I mean, they
yeah,
use those two running back formations with him a lot. So I think it makes sense. I think they're definitely going to do a lot of three wide receiver sets. I mean, they did that a
right,
lot last year, but not really as much relative to the rest of the NFL. But yeah, I mean that third wide receiver spot is still one that is up for grabs. Obviously, they have Cedric Wilson and River Craycraft as I guess the number 2, 3, and 4 wide receivers right now. I'm not sure if I necessarily say that that's truly what it is based off of what I'm seeing in training camp right now. I think Barrios has definitely been the most impressive wide receiver, not named Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Um, but
and
I think any of those guys could end up kind of taking that third spot.
and uh, Robbie Chosen Anderson. Which
It's
um,
Robbie Chosen now. That's what
okay,
I'm
okay,
referring to him as Chosen. That's what it is.
okay. So just referring to as Chosen because I wasn't sure, and they're listing most of these guys by their last name. So
Yeah.
there he was a third team wide receiver. Um, and I think that's a guy who I did they expect more from him
Well, I mean,
so far?
he had a very impressive. I really thought he was probably the top performer, truthfully, in OTAs. Like that's how good he was. And obviously, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle weren't really getting many reps. I know Tyreek was dealing with something in the spring, so you kind of take that with a grain of salt. But again, he went out there and he made the plays. Didn't really see it. It seems like his reps been kind of limited too. And we asked Wes Welker about that late last week, and he said, yeah, I think that we're all just kind of like mixing the guys in. I don't know if he's kind of just getting lost in the shuffle behind maybe some younger guys or what it may be. Like my initial theory was that maybe they already know what they've seen from him. Like they already know what they got from him. So maybe they're
Yeah,
trying to see some younger guys, get some guys, younger reps, maybe get the new guys who don't have as much chemistry. I don't know. It's either one of two things. It's either that he's not really made a good impression on them, which I find that hard to believe because he was so good in the spring, or it's that they know what they have in him and then they're trying to see the other guys. Because again, this time last year, we didn't really know who was going to be the number 3 wide receiver. You had Ezukama, who's now a second-year player as a rookie. He was looking really good. Cedric Wilson was really looking really good. And then ultimately, neither of those guys really contributed at all on offense. It was River Craycraft and really Trent Sherfield that was the number 3 guy. So I mean, again, it kind of goes back to like the preseason games are going to be really impactful to decide who really does take that spot. And
right.
again, the depth chart only means so much.
It means only so much right now,
Yeah,
and it can I assure you it changes day to day, and it will definitely change by the time we're here next week,
yeah.
based on whatever we see Friday night. Um, right as far right now, we've got Mr. White
Like the backup quarterback.
at,
That's another thing I wanted to bring
at
out.
number
Bring up.
two, and Mr.
Without a,
Thompson, number 3.
so that's an interesting thing because again, they only depth chart is fluid, but
Right.
All the reports from camp, at least through OTAs and maybe the first couple of days of training camp, were that Skyler looked better running the offense than Mike White. So again, they threw a lot of the new guys, the new wide receivers, with the third team just kind of naturally. I mean, they kind of gave the incumbent wide receivers the edge there. So again, I don't know how much to look into that, but is this maybe like experience kind of playing a factor? Is it genuinely that the team has him as the backup right now? Obviously, Mike McDaniel spoke about that as well, and he said, you don't want to prematurely give one guy the edge because then another guy kind of catches on. I think we have seen that from Mike White, him looking a lot more comfortable running the offense. But yeah, I mean that caught my eye too, because I thought just kind of naturally, given Skyler's experience with this team and this system, and just the way he looked through OTAs in the first 2 weeks of training camp, I thought maybe maybe that's one of those things where they give him the edge and kind of give him the acknowledgement there. But that's for sure a position battle that it's going to be decided in training camp. In preseason
Games.
preseason games. Tua, we don't know if he or other starters are going to play in the preseason opener on Friday. McDaniel said he hasn't decided that yet. I'd be surprised if we see them. I feel like it's going to be one of those things where, we see him, sit out the first 2, and then maybe the third game he gets similar to last year against the Eagles, where he goes out there and he gets, 1 or 2 series. But definitely, I think that they know what they have in Tua. They know what they have in the Tua to Waddle and Hill connection. And these preseason games are really beneficial to see the 2 guys competing for the number 2 spot, to get a lot of those reps and see how they kind of perform in live fire, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's it's just interesting, to see where the coaches' minds are at this moment, or at whatever moment they were, when they made this chart. So yeah, the first depth chart is always good for a training camp filler story. If okay, that takes care of this day, so I can move that feature or that to the next day, and in case but unless somebody gets injured, and then that feature keeps pushing along and pushed along, or something really interesting happens. I don't know if there's much excitement about it.
Oh man! Oh no!
Well,
There's a lot of fan excitement.
no,
Maybe you're not
no.
excited.
Fans will
Maybe
jump on
you're not
anything at this point
excited.
because they're starving. This is why training camp is. We talk about all this stuff during training camp because we are feeding we feed the content beast, as we often talk about today. We feed the fan beast. We're just throwing them morsels, and sometimes we throw them steak cuts, and sometimes we're just throwing them spam, and that's all. But they're sitting there, they're gobbling up, so the depth chart is frozen pizza. I mean, we're talking Totino's too. Okay,
this is
not even like DiGiorno.
This is Domino's. I'm a Domino's man. This is a
No,
Domino's.
I said frozen pizza. Oh, I said frozen pizza. Not you Domino's is sort of like the frozen pizza of pizza places.
Oh, come on. We're not gonna slander Domino's on this wonderful Tuesday night.
The one thing, okay, I give you this. Domino's would I like the fact that they can do a cut that gives them the square pieces in the middle, and then they can do a thin crust, and I like the we'll do a bacon, mushroom, and beef or sausage. I'll do that.
Oh man, if you're like tuning in the middle of this, you're like, it's a football podcast or a Domino's or pizza podcast.
That's good stuff. Hey, we're full service here. This is what makes this podcast
versatile.
We're not sure what's going to happen.
No, I get you though. I will say, again, it's all fluid. I think it's more telling, the position, especially for the Dolphins, to just kind of move guys around at different spots. Elijah Campbell, who's a former cornerbacker, spent time as cornerback. He's the second team safety. And there's a lot of injuries to that group. So I mean, I think that's telling, a guy who doesn't have a ton of reps at safety, is getting, second team acknowledgement, at least for now. Another thing that just kind of stood out to me, and we haven't really talked much about the tight ends because, I mean, they don't really throw much to the tight ends. But there was kind of a lot of hype behind some of their young guys. Elijah Higgins, their 6th-round pick, Julian Hill, who they signed as an undrafted free agent, Tanner Connor, an undrafted free agent from last year, who they really liked and made the team, but he's on the pup list right now. All those guys are behind the veteran additions, Tyler Croft and Eric Goddard. I think that's one of those things that's kind of more telling of how they feel about the young guys compared to the veteran guys right now. But who knows? A lot of stuff can happen until August 8th at approximately 6:59 p.m. And then when the season kicks off, September 10th, at SoFi Stadium, the Dolphins take on Los Angeles Chargers. But nonetheless, still interesting to look at, discuss all that. All right, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back on the other side of things, we spoke to Dolphins coordinators and assistant coaches late last week. First time speaking to Vic Fangio since the start of training camp. He had some interesting comments about the state of the defense that he's now overseeing. We're going to get into those comments and dissect them after the break. Stay locked with us. We'll be back soon. What's going on, everybody? Still here on the Dolphins In Depth podcast with David Neal, talking all things Dolphins. Now, in the first half, we took a look at the Dolphins' initial depth chart, analysis, thoughts, and questions about that. We're going to move really back to on the field and kind of the state of the Dolphins team. Again, entering the third week, or they're in the third week of training camp, hosting joint practices with the Atlanta Falcons. However, they've been tinkering with the roster, the back end of the roster, releasing some guys, signing some guys, trying to add some depth, and kind of compensate for some injuries that they've sustained through the first 2 weeks of training camp. But before the, I would say, the kind of slew and flurry of roster moves they made in the past 72 or so hours, we had some interesting comments from new defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, again, in his first year leading this Miami defense that really entered training camp with high expectations. Even after the injury of Jalen Ramsey, there's some high expectations. But he said multiple interesting things about the team, the depth, and I want to get into that. First, we're going to start with a question that I posed to him. I wanted to know, again, we talked about the number of safety options that they have next to Javon Holland. I was wondering if, maybe there's a chance they can do some 3 safety packages, kind of mix things up. And the exact quote about the possibility of a 3 safety package from Fangio was, quote, "Not right now. We're still looking for the guy to surface next to Javon. So once we find that, we'll see if we have a third one." Now, you move around. He was also asked about the young cornerbacks who are being asked to step up in place of Jalen Ramsey, Noah Igbenogany, and Cam Smith. And Fangio says, "I think both of them are making good progress. They're not where we need them to be just yet, but I think both of them are working hard and giving us good progress. And hopefully by game one of them or somebody else will surface and take that position." And then finally, he was asked about the depth that they have along the defensive line, the guys that they have in place right now. And he said, "We're still looking for a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th guy to surface." He said, "We're really happy with the core guys, Christian Wilkins, Zach Sealer, Raekwon Davis, but we still need some depth there." And I thought that last comment was very interesting because about not even 24 hours later, the Dolphins tried out a trio of veteran defensive linemen. They eventually signed one of those guys, Deshaun Hand, a veteran who knows Tua and Jalen Waddle and Raekwon Davis from their time in Alabama. He's played in the NFL for a couple of years. They signed him. They released an undrafted player. But just the fact that you hear those comments from Fangio and then you see them make moves to not only kind of get rid of, they cut an undrafted guy, but getting some more veteran guys, and then they're working out veteran guys. Again, a lot of high expectations for this defense entering the season. Are Fangio's comments something, nothing, or maybe a little bit in the middle? Just kind of want to wait and see how this defense shakes out. What would you kind of take from those comments?
Well, obviously, we always say, right? We've said on this podcast, they can say what they want, and it's like life. You can say whatever you want. Let's watch what you do.
Yeah.
And if you say you're looking for somebody else, if you say you're looking for somebody else, and then you try out a bunch of veteran guys, well, yeah, that kind of says that you're still looking for somebody else, and you don't see it immediately or soon enough out of your young guys. And his comments on the back end are, probably pretty accurate. Um, uh, there's a tendency to wonder if he's playing a little bit of mind games, but
I mean, hey, they paid Vic Fangio a lot of money. They paid him the highest paid defensive coordinator. He says we don't have any depth in the defensive line. Before you know it, they're working
yeah,
on defensive line.
right, and exactly, and then in the back end, let's see what happens in the next few weeks, and see if he's just trying to get somebody to really make a move forward. But it is interesting that this defense, which has some really just significant solid big time pieces, obviously he feels like they don't have everything else to, or it seems like he doesn't feel like they have everything else to fill in the meal.
Yeah, I mean, he said this. He said this at the end of mandatory minicamp. He said we got some talent in a lot of places, and then he said in some spots we got to find the talent. I mean, it's not the first time that he's kind of said. I mean, and obviously, I mean, he's a football coach. He's kind of old school. There's a lot of people that say he's a straight shooter, so he'll just say call it like it is. So there is some like, all right, like how much is this just him kind of just being kind of an old school football coach and not being content at all? To your point about monitoring what they do and not just what they say, I thought one of the more interesting moves was back when they signed Eli Apple, and that caught my eye because when Jalen Ramsey went down, McDaniel was asked about the team working out free agent cornerbacks, and he said, "Yeah, we'll probably work out some guy for quote depth purposes." They go sign a guy in Eli Apple who is the most I won't say accomplished, but experienced cornerback, healthy cornerback outside of Jalen Ramsey. Excuse me, outside of Xavier Howard. When you say depth purposes, I was assuming it was going to be a young guy,
right,
they just need just to kind of get through the reps because they have some injured
right,
cornerbacks.
and then somebody who can put, if he does make the roster, he's going to wind up playing more on special teams than anything else.
Exactly. Like no, like this Eli Apple is a guy who has starting
They said a
experience.
starter.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. And again, signing a veteran defensive lineman, days, just 2 days after his comments. Obviously they kind of wanted more there. They wanted more production there. Safety is interesting because and Banjo said this as well, he just really doesn't have enough information to like just to really say what he has there. Obviously, they have Javon Holland, Deshaun Elliott. They signed him from the Lions in the offseason. He's been getting a lot of reps. But two of the main guys who they'd be kind of working in to see how they fit in this defense haven't been able to because of injuries, and that's Brandon Jones and Trey Williams. So he said, like, I just don't have enough information right now. And I mean, maybe that's part of it. Like, he just doesn't know enough right now, especially with the young guys, the young cornerbacks as well. Noah Igbenogany, Cam Smith. Noah's working in a new scheme, and he's looked good, but he's worked playing in a new scheme and hasn't had a lot of playing time in his career. Cam Smith is a rookie, so a lot of it is just like he just doesn't know what he has, and it's just a little too early to say what he has. But again, for a defense that a lot of people expected to make the jump and be a top 10, maybe elite unit, truly elite unit, for him to say, we don't have depth at multiple spots, and I just don't know if we have the guys yet. It's kind of interesting to me. I think that when you look at the Dolphins offense, what they have. They have an established starter and Tua when healthy. They have the two fastest wide receivers in the NFL, and you're like, all right, like you can work with that. And on the Dolphins side, they have he said it himself. They have the talent there. They have talent in a lot of spots. Like you said, he had a lot of high praise for Christian Wilkins as well as Javon Holland. He called Christian Wilkins already one of the top players in the league, and he said he expects Javon Holland to be a top safety. But even David Long, he said, he's had some ups and downs. We talked to his position coach, and he was effusive in praise. And the first thing that Vic Fangio said was, he's had his ups and downs in this system. So he just seems to be a straight shooter. Like you're gonna call it like it is. You're not gonna gas your head unless he thinks you really deserve it. That's what it seems like right now.
I mean, it's a lot of coaches are like that, but I also think he obviously doesn't want anybody getting too high and comfortable with themselves outside of those certain players that everybody knows they're there. I'm sure he doesn't want anybody getting too high and comfortable with themselves as they pick up a new system and execute it, and being very happy with themselves until they have executed it to uh, to a high level in a game. And uh, playing well in practice is good, and you need to do that. But I'm sure he's thinking, okay, let's see how we look on Friday night. And I think that's we'll see in the future again with what they do. We'll see how comfortable they are with what they have. And um, although let me tell you what, if they get lit up by Atlanta in any way,
I mean, it's a preseason game.
it's a preseason game, but it's Atlanta.
I mean, hey, Atlanta. I was talking to somebody at practice, and I'm like, Atlanta is not like they're not a juggernaut by any means. I mean, haven't made the playoffs and God knows since like the Matt Ryan days. But you know, it's not like they're like a basement dweller the past 2 years. I mean, they were kind of around a 500 team. They added some nice players in the offseason. Like I mean, it kind of brings me into my last point, which was really about the Dolphins' offenses. It really hasn't been the start to training camp that a lot of people expected. I don't want to make too much of it because I think that this is just kind of the adjustment period in year two. Like teams know what the Dolphins do best, so they're working to counteract it. And now we're kind of seeing those growing pains, and we saw that again in Tuesday's practice with some red zone struggles, some procedural penalties that they still got to clean up from last year. Does that change the start of training camp for the Dolphins offense change? Maybe a potential preseason kind of setup in your eyes, like on Friday night. Do you want to see the starting defense try to work out the kinks of that new defense? You want to see the offense out there, or do you just kind of shelf the guys until game 2, game 3? Because they still have they have another week of Houston practice. Houston right practices next week, so they got 2 more kind of inter squad practices before that preseason game.
I'll stay with what I said a couple weeks ago. I want to see the first team offense for one or two series.
In game 1, in preseason game 1.
In game 1, yeah. And let's just see where you are. I want to see it for one or two series. And then, and then if you walk down the field and score, okay, and look good doing it, okay, fine. That shows me where you are. You're done. I want to see the first team defense for, again, one or two possessions. I want to see where this is, I just think you should want to see where,
the team is
where these guys are. Yeah. Just this. Okay. We've had practice. We had joint practice. We've had, yeah. But let's get to this next level of, sort of rubber bullets flying, if you will. And let's kind of see where we are there. And, I don't think you play guys deep into the game.
Yeah, I mean, I would say certain vets like X, I'm probably sitting him out. Teron Armstead, I'm probably sitting him out. Outside of that, I don't think there's any established vets that I like. Those are the 2 guys who, for sure, just given their injury history, I would say they don't need to play in the preseason, or if they do, they play one series in the 3rd game. But outside of those guys, I tend to agree with your point. I think that the Dolphins should kind of take an approach that they took last year, where Tua didn't play in the first preseason game, but the first team offense. Oh, sorry, excuse me. The first team offensive line was on the field. You don't. No, I don't need to see Waddle. I don't need to see Tyreek. If you put the starting offensive line out there, and then maybe even for 2 series, you get the 2 starting offensive line in there, and then you maybe rotate Eichenberg to get some of the other guys competing, maybe get them 2 series. And then also, this is opportunity to, we said before, see what the backup contenders have. Maybe first game you're having Mike White start the game with the first team offensive line, get a couple series in, then you get Mike White, then you get Skylar Thompson in there, and then maybe you flip it for the second game. I mean, it's all kind of relative depending on how the offense progresses in practice. But I'm cool. I'm cool with what I've seen from Tua. I don't think it's been great. I don't think the offense has been great, but I'm cool with kind of sitting Tua out until the third game again. Like truthfully, I'm fine with that. I'd rather see the offensive line continue to, because I think that's my main kind of point of concern at this point with the team, the offensive line, especially that left guard spot. I'd rather see them kind of get things gelling and kind of work on their time in there.
I think I understand the aversion to basically exposing key guys to being hurt, which, as we know, can happen any play, any way, any number of, anything from, big hit, bad step, meteor falling, whatever, but I do think as a, just a guy who in the information gathering way, I do want to see, and I don't need to see it long. I do want to see the first team offense. I do want to see the first team defense. I'm thinking, I'm not saying that as a fan. I'm saying that if I were a coach, and obviously they have 10,000 other concerns, but just, this is your base. This is your product. This is your baby. So let's see what, the product in its best form looks like right now. Let's see the state it is right now, because, it's probably perfectly fine. But, the best teams, I think they check back they check back periodically. Okay, let's make sure it's still perfectly fine. Okay, right. You're still good. Okay. Let's, and I don't think I think, you want to get a lot of reps in for a lot of different people. I think you can still do that. But let's just, again, let's just see where you really are. If you're the first team defense, let's really see in a pseudo game situation, how guys are grasping their keys, how guys are grasping the defense. Let's really see. Or let's just at least get a little hint of seeing. And then, it's something you take into the next week of practices and say, okay, we're doing this well, let's do cursory work on this and then move on to something else. Or saying, hey, we're really, we're not doing this well, or maybe even we're not doing this as well as we were last year. Because teams, there's inconsistency in players. I mean, even at a high, there's inconsistency, at a high level that, you're doing something on the 1 to 10 scale, you're doing, where 1 year you're doing it at 9.5 and the next year you're doing it at 8.5. Or the next year you're doing it for some reason at 7.8, so I just think you want to make sure where you are, where you think you are, but let's just a little more information on where you really are. And then, after that, go on and get the guys in so you can see them and make good decisions about, the top to bottom of the roster. Because, I do agree that you never know what player is going to make that difference for you in a season. And, the NFL is still a very tight league. So.
Yeah, we'll see. Again, McDaniel said he hasn't made any on Tuesday when he spoke to media. He said he hadn't made any decisions yet. Speaks Wednesday morning. Maybe we'll find a little bit more then. Maybe he'll kind of talk to a few guys that he doesn't anticipate on planning. To your point, yeah, I mean, Jalen Waddle said definitely wasn't the practice the offense wanted, but they're going to try to learn from that, bounce back. So we'll see what they do. The second day of joint practice with the Falcons, as well as for the preseason opener on Friday. All right, that brings us to the end of another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I want to thank you guys as always for tuning in. Reminder to subscribe, like, share,
the Miami Herald,
to the Miami Herald YouTube page, as well as the Miami Herald. Again,
Miami Herald itself. Get all of our stories. Daniel's stories of Dolphins, my stories on doctors, taking out stuff and they taking out the wrong thing in surgery. Yeah, oh, you didn't realize that was the most popular story on our website. Dude thought he took out a kidney. He took out an inflamed cyst. Too much to tell the patient, or the patient. Too much for the patient to find out. But
You can get everything at the Miami Herald, including our wall-to-wall coverage of training camp. Again, we're there every day with a um, live blog of McDaniel's comments before practice, notebook as well as main story, taking away or recapping our takeaways from training camp, as well as we're going to be there Friday night to recap the first preseason game. We'll talk to you next week to recap another week of Dolphins football. But until then, you guys take care. See you.